Let us now settle into a spirit of worship with a moment of quiet to be followed by the music of Joseph Martin, On the Blue Ridge. You are also invited at this time to light a silent candle of joy or sorrow.
Reverend Michelle Collins writes, "Here we are together, bearers of imagination, creators of new worlds. It's our imagination that lifts us beyond despair, that whispers, 'What if?' and dares to answer. Today we gather to renew that spark, to embrace the power to dream. Come, let us imagine boldly and worship together."
Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Worcester, a congregation of love, hope, and justice, inspiring people to take on the challenges of a changing world. My name is Drew Wilkin. I am one of your worship associates this morning. We begin by acknowledging that in Worcester, Massachusetts, we work, learn, live, and worship on the seized ancestral homeland of the Nipmuc people who survive and remain active as the Nipmuc tribe. If you would like to learn more about the Nipmuc community, please see the brochure in our foyer. We offer a special welcome to those of you visiting for the first time in person and online this morning. We are delighted that you are here. We hope that you will join us in the fellowship hall following the service for refreshments and conversation. If you have questions or want more information about this service or any of the ministries or programs of this congregation, please ask. We invite you to fill out the cards found in the pews. These cards can be placed in the offering plate or given to one of the ushers or greeters this morning. For those of you joining us online this morning, we offer you a special welcome for safety purposes, and so that we might come to know you better. If you are able, please place your name on your video feed. Please take a moment to sign one of the attendance clipboards that are being passed around. Though you are not obligated to sign, we appreciate your information and will use this information only for church purposes. During the service, we offer an opportunity to share a brief personal joy or sorrow. If you would like yours to be read aloud, please print it on an index card in the pew and drop it in the collection plate when it comes around. These cards will also be posted outside the minister's office to be shared with our friends at other services. For those online, you can place a joy or sorrow in the chat, and we will share it during this time of the service. In the foyer are listening devices, large print service programs, and hymnals for those who may find their assistance to be beneficial. Please see one of our ushers who will be pleased to assist you. I now invite you to turn your technology to worship mode. Finally, please note our announcements on the back of the program. There will be time for short verbal announcements following the postlude. We are so glad you are here and hope that this morning is an opportunity for rest, reflection, and rejuvenation. The opening words are a call to worship in action by Sharon Wiley. It is said the ministers are here to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. I say we are all afflicted and we are all comfortable. May our time together this morning be a comfort and a confrontation. May we here find peace in times of tumult. May we here invite tumult into lives of peace. May we here find calm in the times of restlessness. May we here allow restlessness to evolve into action. Let this be the place you consider what you've never considered. Let this be the place you imagine for yourself something new and unthinkable. May this hour bring dreams of new ways of being into the world. Come, let us worship together.
I don't know whether people online can hear me. I know that there was some concern earlier about the mic up here, but I think we're getting it fixed for those of you who are online, and I apologize if there was any disruption. Last week we neglected to do the final hymn because I made the last minute and arbitrary decision that we would stay with the spirit of the place as it was manifest in that moment, and I think it was the right call. However, I did make a promise to Barry Brigham that I would include that hymn in an upcoming service, and today seemed like a good day to do that. So I would have you rise in body or in spirit and find hymn number 1024 in your teal hymnals, and prepare to do what the song suggests. Sing. Sing when the Spirit says sing. Got to sing when the Spirit says sing. When the Spirit says sing, you've got to sing. You've got to sing when the Spirit says sing. 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 Spirit says sing, Spirit says sing. Now you gotta put your books down and dance. Spirit says dance. You got to dance when the Spirit says dance. When the Spirit says dance, you've got to dance. You've got to dance when the Spirit says dance. 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 Now you gotta laugh. Laugh when the Spirit says laugh. Got to laugh when the Spirit says laugh. When the Spirit says laugh, you got to laugh. Laugh when the Spirit says laugh. 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 Now you gotta shout. Got to shout when the Spirit says shout. I can't hear you. Got to shout when the Spirit says shout. When the Spirit says shout, you've got to shout, oh Lord. You've got to shout when the Spirit says shout. 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 Now you got to do again. Do when the Spirit says do. You've got to do when the Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, you've got to do. You've got to do when the Spirit says do. 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 Whew. You might not have had your coffee yet, but you got your exercise. I want to invite our basket bearers forward at this time. For those of you who are newest among us, this is the weekly opportunity when we worship for our participants in our religious exploration program to contribute to the ongoing ministry of the emergency fund in this congregation. So if you have change that you would like to contribute, please raise your hands, and one of our basket bearers will be sure to find you. Don't forget the extreme right and the extreme left of the congregation. What? All right. And you are welcome to bring your baskets to me as we send you forth for a wondrous day of At this time, I would like very much to invite all of those wishing to become members of this religious community to step forward and to join me here on the chancel. I would also invite our president of the board, Melissa McKeon, and I'm not going to invite Melissa because she has already arrived. Mary Paradiso, who nope, you all come.
You, me.
This is all about mild confusion. It is our way of introducing you to this congregation, just so you're confusion, no. We gather here this morning as an expression of our mutual quest toward personal and religious fulfillment. We gather secure in the knowledge that the truths that we seek are not constrained by doctrine or dogma. We recognize that each of us, each of you, is here for reasons known only in the individual heart, and yet we gather in common fellowship to affect and sustain an atmosphere of mutualness.
Here we do not ask you to believe that which is espoused by another. We ask only that you follow faithfully what your conscience dictates, mindful that in your search you will encounter other truths, other convictions, other faiths. Here you will be embraced as a member of a common family of seekers, all those past and present who have dedicated themselves to the tasks of nurture, compassion, and action. All those who have been and are sympathetic to a common vision that no one person is an island unto themselves, and we are all members of a larger family of life.
Would members and friends of this congregation, what's that? Not getting it? Hold on. Un moment. Can you hear me now? All right. Would the members and friends of this congregation please rise and join together in our congregational affirmation found in your insert. We, the members and friends of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Worcester, welcome you to our church. We invite you to share our common concern for justice and righteousness, and our belief that through common efforts we may better shape the meaning of our lives. We pledge to you our friendship and support as we strive to embody the common purposes that bring us here.
This morning, you have come forward of your own free will. Is it in this spirit of freedom, honoring your own religious values and respecting those who journey with you, that you wish to join this liberal religious community?
Then I invite you, as a symbol of this commitment, to add your name to our register and receive the gifts of fellowship offered here this morning. So your name, thank you so much. Your name and today's date, which is the 4th of May. That's right. She's reminding me that it's the 4th of May. May the 4th be with you. And your response is, and also with you. Good. Please be seated. So it's 5-4. Vicky Biancola, welcome. Thank you. Your name and today's date, which is 5. Is it Malouf? Heather Malouf. Name and then date, which is the 4th. Trevor Malouf. Brian Rousseau. So yeah, you can sign it. That's fine. And the date is. Deborah Ruth Mockran. Look, you get to finish the page. Meredith Newman. Please welcome our newest members. You're welcome to be seated. Thank you so much. So I want to begin my sermon by giving a shout out here to all of those of you who showed up last Monday to the Wachusett School Board Committee meeting. I was particularly moved by the presence of Unitarian Universalists from this congregation and First Unitarian and First Church Sterling. I want you to know that we've already had our congregational meeting. We passed the budget. It all happened in the corner of the room. We had enough people for a quorum. It was good. Okay? And I want to thank Jessie Trowbridge for her for her advocacy and for her very stirring words as someone who is of deep conscience, but also a parent who loves her children and loves our children, and who spoke truth to power on that day. I'm married to the editor of The Landmark, and she got lots of praise for covering this particular event. She also got crap, which is the sign of a good editor. And so I'm glad for that. I'm mindful that what we experienced this week in our local school district is not unlike what is happening across our country right now in many educational systems, both at the primary school age and also within our colleges and universities, as people strive to restrict access to information in order to be able to control what children, youth, and young adults have access to, but ultimately in service to a vision of the world that is only going to be maintained if ignorance itself reigns supreme. And so my opportunity this morning to talk about education and imagination is the confluence of another number of things, not only this experience last Monday where I could not have been prouder of watching those of you from this congregation and across our community. And when I say those of you, I think there were 3 people that spoke in favor of the motion, one of which was the actual person who made the motion to the school board, and 99.999% of the people that were there were in favor of squashing it as quickly as possible. And it failed for lack of a second. So, 20 minutes of public commentary was an hour and 40 minutes later, that commentary was done. And when it came time for that vote to occur, the motion was read and made, and there was a request for a second, and no one spoke up, which told us a lot about where we stood in relationship to the sentiments that were shared by other members of that school committee and of the community at large. But it is something that we are having to grapple with in very new ways across our country, and I would suggest across our world, as we see the rise of tyrannical government seeking to impose a particular religio-philosophical ideal, and I would say regressive ideal, on the populations that it has been elected or established to serve, although one could argue that that is not what's happening. And so the question today before us is, what is the relationship between education and imagination at a moment in our history where we see so many attempts to restrict and to roll back the very kinds of freedoms that are so essential for a thriving democracy in our case? And today, part of the confluence of events was not just what happened last Monday here. Today is the 229th anniversary of the birth of one Horace Mann. Does anyone know who Horace Mann is? Jesse, who's Horace Mann? Okay. Anyone else know who Horace Mann is? Neil? He was the education guy, yes. He was. In the first quarter of the 19th century, Horace Mann became both a Massachusetts statesperson. He served as education secretary for the Commonwealth for 12 years. He was an abolitionist and a Unitarian. And his likeness is part of the statues that adorn the front of the Massachusetts State House and greet visitors from across the Commonwealth and also the world. And so we come to this moment in our calendar that comes around every umpteen years when on a Sunday we can look to this anniversary for wisdom, which is what I intend to do. He started out as a Congregationalist, which was not uncommon in the early part of the 19th century, since Unitarianism in particular was born out of New England Congregationalism. But man's conversion to Unitarianism was from a particularly painful experience. One of his biographers notes that man was raised in the Congregational Church in Franklin, Massachusetts, under the leadership of the Reverend Dr. Nathaniel Emmons, a well-known exponent of New Light Calvinism, and I will talk about New Light Calvinism during another sermon where I will bid you to fall asleep. Calvinism, in man's own words, Emmons expounded all the doctrines of total depravity, election, reprobation, and not only the eternity but the extremity of hell torments, unflinchingly and in their most terrible significance, while he rarely, if ever, descanted on the joys of heaven, and never, in my recollection, upon the essential and necessary happiness of a virtuous life. Sounds like a winner. Man was, by his own account, a gullible student of such teachings until the age of 14, when his older brother by 4 years, Stephen, drowned. Emmons used the occasion of Stephen's funeral to preach of the hell that awaited those dying in an unconverted state. Hearing his mother's groan of pain at this pronouncement, man suspended his Calvinist beliefs in a creator who could be so cruel, and commenced his lifelong belief in the kindness and ethical integrity of God. He became a member of the First Parish of Dedham, Massachusetts, who some of you know in the history of Unitarianism plays a pivotal role in the transformation of New England Congregationalism to Unitarianism. This involves something that has come to be known as the Dedham case. In New England, there were, in most congregations, two circles of membership, the church and the parish. The church were all of those who had made a public confession of faith, and they were usually the social elite. It was kind of hard to break into the church if you weren't already there, in other words, or part of the lineage of people who were there. But they were the folks that maintained all of the church's assets. And what would those assets have been at the time? The communion silver and the altar candles were the tangible assets, and then the records, what they called the pew records. See, back in the day, they didn't do pledges per se, but families would purchase their pew for the year. And in many New England congregations, you can actually go in and find little plates on the pews that will tell you what family. And if you think coming into a congregation like this and sitting somewhere where someone has sat for a century will get you noticed, if you sat in a family's pew that had been paid for, I think that hell itself entered into even Unitarian congregations, probably. But there was a row that occurred when a more liberal minister from Harvard was called to the church, and those in the parish, larger parish group, and parish meant anyone who had been taxed, yes, I said taxed, to support the parish in town, which tended to be a more liberal crowd, theologically and socially. They appreciated the new minister, but the church did not. And so the church walked out carrying all of the assets, and the parish, those that were left, sued for the return of them. And in a Supreme Court case from the Massachusetts Supreme Court called Baker versus Fales, the Supreme Court essentially articulated that those who were left on the property were the rightful owners of the assets of the church, and so the assets were returned. And those former members of the church apparently went across the street and built a new congregational church. And I love the mythology around this. The mythology is that they built it so that when you opened the doors of either the church, you could see right down through the sanctuary, the other, but the parish would have none of that, and so one Sunday after church, apparently the members of the parish that were left in the original church walked out, surrounded the building, picked it up off its foundation, and turned it sideways so they didn't have to look at those people. So anyone who says to me, well, Unitarians aren't all that petty, I have to tell them that story, right? So he joined the Dedham congregation, and he set up a legal office in Dedham, where he had graduated from Brown University and came to Dedham in order to start up as a lawyer. And he began to outline his belief rather early in the importance of education as it related to what he thought was the fate of the nation. To put it mildly, Howe was worried about the state of democracy in this antebellum period, in the, I guess, pre-antebellum. This is pre-Civil War. But the fledgling democracy that had come about from 1790 on. So we're talking about 40 years since the creation of the Constitution. And what he was worried about, essentially, is populations that could factionalize very easily for lack of having any kind of significant education about the possibility of democracy itself and the possibility of self-governance, and instead operate to vote only in service to their own self-interests. Anyone worried about that? And so he begins to talk about this. And so in his first year of practice, says another one of his biographers, in Dedham, he was invited to deliver a local Independence Day address, and he outlined for the first time the basic principles that he would return to in subsequent public statements, arguing that education, intelligent use of the elective franchise, and religious freedom are the means by which American liberties are preserved. John Quincy Adams, the newly elected president, was in attendance that day, and impressed by what he heard, Adams predicted that man would have a very distinguished career. Then in 1937, Horace Mann began his 12-year stint as the Secretary of Education for the State Education Board for the Commonwealth, and traveled a great deal to spread his philosophical outlook that education was a primary means through which democracy would both be saved and advanced. Another biographer notes, Mann embarked on speaking tours throughout Massachusetts to make a case for the system of common schools, what you and I now know as public education. Of the lectures, his third, which was delivered in 1839, most directly addressed the theme of the government's relationship to public education. Entitled The Necessity of Education in a Republican Government, the address helped elucidate the shifting conceptions of public education and republicanism during a time of rapid national expansion and democratization. Mann's address identified education as an institution uniquely positioned to confront the excesses of American democracy. He encouraged his listeners to regard education as a process that, for good or ill, inevitably shaped the relationship of the mind to the world. Stressing the dangers unique to the American system of democratic governance, Mann employed a method of residues that ultimately left education alone as the most powerful, indeed as the only solution to the excesses of democracy. And again, the excesses of democracy really being factionalization, the inability to perceive one's obligation to serve the larger goal of a nation united, and instead continue to be only interested in that which served themselves. Interestingly enough, the very year that Mann began his tenure as the Secretary of Education, we find William Ellery Channing, then Unitarian minister at our Federal Street Church in Boston, articulating a similar philosophy of education specifically for the Sunday school and the family, but as he notes in the particular lecture out of which I will quote here, also the larger system of education itself. Speaking before the Sunday School Society that year, Channing writes in part, "The great end of religious instruction, whether in the Sunday school or family, is not to stamp our minds irresistibly on the young, but to stir up their own. Not to make them see with our eyes, but to look inquiringly and steadily with their own. Not to give them a definite amount of knowledge, but to inspire a fervent love of truth. Not to form an outward regularity, but to touch inward springs. Not to burden the memory, but to quicken and strengthen the power of thought. Not to bind them by ineradicable prejudices to our particular sect or particular notions, but to prepare them for impartial, conscientious judging of whatever subjects may, in the course of providence, be offered to their decision." You can hear echoes of this sentiment, which was becoming prevalent in our religious movement, in Horace Mann's most controversial project. His biographer notes that Mann's most controversial project for the Board of Education involved his advocacy for non-sectarian religious education. Horace Mann believed that children in public schools should be taught the ethical principles common across Christianity, but not those doctrines about which different sects disagreed. In his own lifetime, he was criticized by those who felt his approach to be anti-Christian, and also those who felt his common denominator approach to Christianity were simply reflections of his own liberal interests in Unitarianism and phrenology. Today, he is still criticized on both sides, as religious conservatives often blame him for taking the steps that would lead to the complete secularization of the public school system, while liberals sometimes criticize his lack of interest in making public education more comfortable for non-Christians. Practically, however, Horace Mann's compromise was possibly the only one that could have both satisfied the day's legal requirement for religious education in public schools and also allow for the tremendous expansion under his leadership of the availability of public education to an increasingly diverse population. Given the gravity of the assault on education in our own era, we might rightly look upon any attempt to advance religious education in our public education systems, both primary and collegiate, with a great deal of skepticism. Like I believe, is it Louisiana now that requires that all schools have the 10 Commandments posted in their schools? If this had been done, what's that? Sorry? Kentucky. So this would, if this is during the early part of the 19th century, that might be in line with the intention of the public schools, right? And what we hear here is someone who is saying, yes, religion in its most general sense, but not in the specificity of the doctrines, which often are codified out of attempts to do this. The other thing that amazes me about all of this, and the 10 Commandments is one of them. Do you know what the era was when the monuments of the 10 Commandments found themselves on the lawns of various civic state houses and courthouses and local city halls? Do you know what it was? 1950s. What did you say? It's exactly right. See, we think it had to do with Reconstruction, and we think that it had to do with, civil rights and all kinds of things. It was when the 10 Commandments were put out in movie form, and the industry decided the best way to advertise this was to put monuments up all over the country of the 10 Commandments. Right? So, this is what education does, right? It gives us a chance to actually analyze what the hell happened and why, which makes it ultimately important for every one of us to have been exposed to environments which teach us how to think, how to find evidence, how to read history, right? How to ask questions. And that's just one example. But given the gravity of the assault on education earlier, we might look at any attempt at religious education in public systems with a great deal of skepticism. But we're in an era where we're seeing an onslaught of attempts to actually do the opposite. So back in 2019, y'all remember 2019, right? Pandemics were not yet in our vocabulary. COVID-19 was something that only researchers studied, and they were studying about it over in other countries, right? But Henry Guru of McMaster University in Canada opined this. He said, under the regime of President Trump, higher education is under siege. Its oft-stated purpose to produce a formative culture necessary to support critical thinking, civic courage, and expand the radical imagination and nurture individual and social agency has been abandoned. To the president and other right-wing populists, universities are objects of disdain. At the same time, the growing crisis of higher education expanding across the globe and increasingly echoes H.G. Wells' remark in 1920 that history is becoming more and more a race between education and catastrophe. Wells' comment is particularly prescient as authoritarianism gains in strength in the United States and a number of other countries. Higher education has been removed from a language that highlights the central question of what the role of learning might be not only in democracy, but also in a time of tyranny. The president's brand of authoritarianism has emerged, writes Guru, at a time in which there is an overabundance of information, coupled with a rise of new digital and visual media whose cognitive models reinforce the assumption that reality be echoed rather than interrogated and critically comprehended. Language has collapsed into mere utility, a lifeless metric, and a market-driven machinery of social death. Reality TV and celebrity culture are the new models of popular education and mass communication, which, when coupled with a society addicted to speed, overstimulation, and unchecked self-interest, create a powerful mode of pedagogy that blurs the line between reality and entertainment, fact and fiction, good and evil, and pleasure and sadism. Answering this for our liberal religious movement, I hear the words of my colleague now of beloved memory, Reverend Marjorie Bowens-Wheatley, who once wrote, "It is time for critical examination to identify the impediments that keep us from greater alignment between what we say we value and our effectiveness in the process of social transformation. We must face the hidden realities that stand in the way of our change. We must gain a clear understanding of the ideologies of liberalism and liberation, which sometimes stand in conflict, inhibiting our progress. These efforts must be coupled with a holistic religious education program, education for critical consciousness, and the practice of freedom, rooted in the doctrine of love. Supporting this work is a multidimensional endeavor, requiring educational, ethical, justice, and pastoral work springing from a new theology of church, of ministry, and of culture." This phrase that Marjorie Bowens-Wheatley uses, we must face the hidden realities that stand in the way of change. We must gain a clear understanding of the the ideologies of liberalism and liberation, which sometimes stand in conflict, inhibiting our progress. Soon as I read that, I had a flashback to one of my early moments in ministry where I am sitting in a room for ministry days prior to General Assembly somewhere in the country, and one of the premier religious education professors in the country, all right, Barbara Harris, is standing at a podium about to address us. She picks up a small marble of the globe and she places it in front of her and begins by saying to us, "I never lecture with my back to the world." And then she opened with these words: "The null curricula of Unitarian Universalism is you have to at least act educated to belong." I think that's what Wheatley's talking about when she talks about liberalism getting in its own way. Because it's one thing to reverence education, it's another thing to demand that everyone speak the same language, have the same experience, use the same paradigms, right? And be judged by the quality of their degree instead of the degree of their commitment to our common humanity. The difference between this obstacle to our evolution as a tradition which is open to all and our attainment of a wider appeal is to go back to understanding education as fundamentally the process by which we excite each person's creativity, imagination, and a growing sense of purpose in the world. Instead of insisting on particular language of the transcendent or particular attainment of a degree or training to belong. This is where it has been a deep meditation for me in terms of the language that I use from this pulpit. Because I'm aware that in certain contexts I can speak in a way where everyone goes, "Do you have to belong to Mensa in order to comprehend what the hell he is saying?" Right? And to speak in a way that stirs people, which, by the way, is what our best educators do. They stir people. They don't give them the truth. They teach them how to discern what the truth is, which is what I think education should be about to begin with. I mean, I teach race, class, and gender at university, right? The big white guy teaching race, class, and gender. And I understand that I come from a very, very privileged place to do that. But I spend the majority of my semester introducing students to the work of particularly black and brown women who have brought forth a critique of who and how we are in this country and in our world, so that we might better understand how it is that we respond to diversity in ways that clamp it down. And instead of saying to them, "You need to believe this," what I invite them to do is consider what the alternative is. Moreover, I ask them to consider what their own experience is, and invite them to consider what kind of experience they might have differently if they took seriously some of the constructs and critiques that are being offered by people who have long since articulated a way of being in our country that is antithetical to the misogyny, the white supremacy, the racism, the genderism, the sexism, that so much defines who we have been, and allow them to envision who we can be. And guess what, folks? It's not just a project for the university classroom, it is a project for this congregation and everyone that is like it. It begins, I think, with the commitment to establish spaces where the exploration and discovery of such sentiments can be nurtured and encouraged, a program that I'm happy to continue to offer, that I'm happy we continue to offer across the lifespan. To say that we create an environment, right, as opposed to establishing the truth, right? To say that we create an environment is a bit like how one tends a garden and encourages the growth of plants. There are two things about this metaphor that excite me. First one is Thich Nhat Hanh, who says, you know, I'd forgotten what the plant was, but let's just say it was cabbage. If you plant cabbage and it doesn't grow, do you blame the cabbage? No, right? The other one comes from my friend Tony Larson, who has a chapter in another friend, Scott Alexander's book on Unitarian evangelism. That is not an oxymoron, by the way. Okay? There's an actual book. I love it. Okay? But Larson tells the story of the poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who was confronted by a visitor who told him he believed children should not be given any religious instruction, making them free to choose their own faith without bias when they grew up. Whereupon Coleridge didn't argue with him, but decided to show him his backyard, which was overgrown with weeds. He told the man, "I'd like you to show you my garden." But when the man saw it, he exclaimed, "Do you call this a garden? There's nothing here but weeds." Coleridge replied, "I did not wish to infringe upon the liberty of the garden in any way. I was just giving the garden a chance to express itself and to choose its own production." Let us not let our educational systems in this country become plots of weeds. Let's work to help them flourish as gardens of imagination, gardens of creativity, gardens of possibility. Amen? Amen. And blessed be. We come to that time in our service when we're given an opportunity to share that which is symbolic of our own efforts. An offering taken up in support of the ongoing mission and ministries of this congregation. I invite you to enter into a spirit of generosity and to contribute what you can in order that you might feel like you too are a part of this growing and awesome effort. For those of you who are online or those of you who would rather contribute digitally to this effort, you're welcome to text 508-2315-335 and follow the lead on your screen. At this time, the morning offering will be received. Now we come to that time in our service when we're given pause to consider what is deepest in our hearts or most profoundly on our minds or in the work of our hands in the days that have transpired or in the prospect of things coming. Joys and sorrows that touch us deeply and are given another measure of meaning because of our capacity to share them in the midst of a company that claims us as a co-journeyer. So I invite those of you who have joys or sorrows today to form lines on either side of the sanctuary, to come and speak briefly into the microphone, telling us first who you are so that those using our auditory enhancement devices might also participate in this important ritual, and then to light a candle if you so desire, or if you simply want to come light a candle in silence, you're welcome to do that as well. Are there joys or sorrows to be shared at this day?
Hi, I'm Laura. Quick update. My homeless daughter scheduled for a C-section this Tuesday. She briefly texted me saying that she does not plan on giving up the baby and she has a plan. So I just pray that this plan is safe and legal. One joking thing, because I like to try to keep something funny in my life at this roller coaster ride right now, Mason has, speaking of education, all of a sudden decided Away in a Manger is going to be his favorite song. So he played that as I was driving, and I almost hit a tree, and I was like, what? So he said, I like God, Grammy. And as a 40-year self-taught pagan, I remember some things, but I swear it's like Grandma Lenahan telling me what to do. So if I brought a Holy Bible into my pagan home, it'd probably implode. But I'd be happy to think of suggestions of some type of book for him that won't set on fire as soon as it comes into my apartment. Thank you.
Morning, I'm Kim. I believe in the power of prayer. Something happened to me 3 weeks ago. We were on the women's retreat. I got some very bad news. My brother-in-law, Mike, has cancer. It's one of the ones that's really, really, really hard. So I got that news, and then I called my husband to tell him, and I was crying, and he freaked out because I found out while I was away that my son was missing for 12 hours. So two very, very big catastrophes happening. And I came back into the room that I was in, and my women at the women's social circle surrounded me with love and hugs. And I told them what happened, and less than a minute later, my son called me. And he was fine. It was miscommunication on where he was. Now, my brother-in-law still has cancer, but if that can work that quickly for my son, I'm going to put it out there to the universe that I need prayers for my brother-in-law, Mike, that he can get through this. He just retired, and and my sister is 10 years younger than him, so she's got a long way to go, and she needs him in her life. So please pray for Mike.
Absolutely. Thank you.
My name is Jessie, and Aaron already gave all the newsworthy updates about the meeting on Monday, but I just want to reiterate my gratitude for everybody in this congregation who showed up either in person or in spirit to offer support and to make it clear that the bill that was, or the motion that was on the table was not okay in our community, and that children have the right to read. And that particular meeting was really powerful for me as a parent. My child, AJ, who is transgender, really, really wanted to attend this meeting, and I was really, really unsure that that was a good idea. They had seen some footage of a previous school committee meeting where someone just had some really nasty messaging and rhetoric specifically directed against a bulletin board project that AJ created and that became this like lightning rod in the community. And I was really worried that that would be this really toxic space for them. But they overruled me, and they came with me, and instead it was just this like amazing outpouring of support for AJ and everything that they believe in and that their friends hold dear, they and their friends hold dear, and that just meant so much to me, and it meant so much to AJ. And as a little PSA, unrelated but related, if someone tells you that their pronouns are something that you don't expect, please make an effort to use their pronouns. We have a lot of conversations in my house these days about how much that means to my kid and to so many people in the transgender community. And I know it's something all of our older brains are struggling with, but it's really important and it really goes a long way. So thank you.
Morning, everybody. I'm Diane. I have two things to share. The lovely Susan Crossley and I went to see our friend Steve Ober this week, I don't know, Monday. And you're here, you were bending over. But Steve Ober is also a lovely and beautiful person. He's in a memory unit in Quabbin Rehab anyway. He is in really pretty good shape. And he, number one, appreciates all the cards you have all sent. And I don't know who made up the little address labels and passed out cards and everything, but he loves the cards, and he loved our visit, and he would really be very appreciative of visits from anybody else who's willing to go. Sue and I can give you some more information. Secondly, I hope I make it through this. My sister is 12 years older than I am. She lives in Jacksonville, Florida. She's in some kind of assisted living situation right now, but she's not taking any care of herself at all. She's probably had untreated depression for years, and my niece is taking her to a doctor tomorrow to insist that she get some medication to help with her condition, because if not, she'll have to go to a nursing home because she's not taking care of herself at all. So, send some good juju out there for my sister. Thanks.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Vicki, and I want to tell you about something. This may or may not be appropriate for this time and place. So I'm new, as you know. So if it's not, please tell me, but please also be gentle. So I was kind of moved by the whole sermon about education and what's happened at Wachusett, of course, and we're talking about education. And one of the things that's happening right now, and I'm sure you all know this, is that the current administration is targeting all kinds of things, including education. And one of the things they are doing is trying to cut the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And one of the things that does that, and it's unclear what's going to happen, there's been a temporary stay on that executive order, who knows what's going to happen. But there's a trickle-down effect to that. And one of the things that is going to happen is that we actually, as a state, get a lot of money from the federal government that goes directly to our public libraries and our schools. And one of the things that is on the chopping block, because I know this is, the governor now put out her budget, and she level funded the lines that fund libraries, the money that goes to libraries across the Commonwealth. The House released their budget that kept the level funding. So the Senate still is looking at this. And what will happen with what's the mess on the federal side and the level funding on the state side, if that remains, is that library services will be cut across the Commonwealth. And one of the things that's on the chopping block is databases to schools and public libraries. And many schools can only afford the databases that are paid for by the state. This may not be clear. I'm available for questions afterward if you have any. So what that means is that teaching our kids, teachers and librarians use those databases in schools to teach about finding good information and evaluating what's all the information that's online. And that is going to simply disappear because schools can't pay for these alone. So, however you feel about what I just said, please call your senator or an email, quick email. Please increase funding to libraries. That's all it would take, or not. So, thank you so much for listening. Tell me if this was wrong.
You're in good company.
Hi, I'm Debbie Merrill, and my concern and challenge is my mother's dementia has progressed quite a bit, so that about 90% of the time when I talk to her, she's extremely anxious, close to hysterical, and she's very confused. She and her husband live in Florida, which makes it more challenging for me to be able to provide help. And they will not move around here because we have snow. So I'm finding it increasingly difficult to work with my stepfather. He and I have vastly different ideas of what would be most helpful for my mother. And we also have very different ideas of what it means to make progress in getting things done. So I'm going to light a candle for my mother. I am trying Aaron's view of using loving inquiry to understand where my my stepfather is coming from. It's not working. The loving part is not working. So the candle's for my mother, and it's for me too, because I'm not a patient person, and there's no progress. So please think of my mother, think of my husband, because he's trying to help me. But anyway, thank you.
Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to confront.
Hi, I'm Kathy, and I'm up here to ask for help on behalf of Chris Ryan and his family. It's 2 adults, 2 children. Chris is recovering from a complicated surgery. So I have the meal train QR code, and it's posted in the hallway, and also where you return your coffee mug after you enjoy it. So thank you.
So those of you who are not at the school committee meeting we're all talking about, don't you feel like you missed something cool? I moved to the Wachusett School District to Holden 25 years ago, and was so excited to be returning to Massachusetts, where I had grown up, and so, from a very red state. And then we landed in Holden, and my husband, after a couple months, and I looked at each other and said, what have we done? We picked this town, and it turned out to be quite different from our values. And so for 25 years, I have bristled to be living in this town, and sort of regretted that I lived in this town. But I didn't feel like that on that Monday with 150 people in that room. It was the first time in my town I felt like I have peeps in this town like that I didn't even know were there. So it was wonderful. I lit a candle for Jim McGovern and his family for the loss of their daughter Molly.
Hi, I'm Paul, and I got a couple concerns. One of the joys is that, I got a joy too, and the joy was that I took the opportunity to spy the sign-up book. I signed the book in May of 2006, so I'm kind of a quasi-old-timer, maybe. The other thing too is I'm really concerned of like the state of the media today. I have a Roku at home, and I get a smart TV, and it seemed to push a lot of wrestling, cars, and I don't see that much on, intellectual stuff, And there are a couple shows that I used to like to watch, and they're no longer on anymore. And that's sad. And lastly, there's a certain person who I guess now lives in Florida, but now in the White House. He's going to be celebrating a birthday, and this really irked me. He wants to have a military parade like they have in Russia. And all I can think of is welcome to the divided states of the United of America. Yeah.
So I'm going to invite us into a simultaneous opportunity to both engage in prayer and hear the musical meditation. We're going to move from there to the benediction, and then I'm going to invite you to rise and quietly greet each other during the postlude. For those of you who have children and you want to go pick them up from class, you can welcome to do that or to head down to Fellowship Hall. So let us be both in the spirit of prayer and meditation. Spirit of life, we come today with many people in our hearts. Help us to find within us the strength to pray for courage, for health and wholeness, for deep and abiding connection, for paths forward when obstacles seem insurmountable. Be with us as we celebrate with joy the milestones that give our lives and those we love meaning, and hold us as we experience the deep and abiding grief that comes with love. We live in such a bruised and hurting world some days that we are astonished at what we are being called to do and be. Help us find within us our own capacity to represent what is deepest in our hearts and most profoundly on our minds, now and in the days forward. Amen. And blessed be. The words of the poet John O'Donohue. May your imagination know the grace of perfect danger, to reach beyond intimation and the wheel of repetition, deep into the call of all the unfinished and unsolved, until the veil of the unknown yields and something original begins to stir toward your senses and grow stronger in your heart. Amen, and blessed be. As we conclude our service this morning, our worship here has ended. Our service continues next with an opportunity for refreshment. Are there any very quick announcements? Sherry. See Sherry if you want to work at IHN this week. Anyone else? Kim? Where is the concert? The Marlboro Middle School for a concert this afternoon. See Kim for more information. Anyone else? Michelle.
Yard sale example. We included a QR code on the back of today's order of service. You can scan that and go to our sign-up page. If you have some time to help volunteer setting up for the yard sale.
Sign up for yard sale. Let's eat.